Hey everybody, welcome back. We're going to discuss some details in this video. I've had several questions about some small things, and so we're going to explore each one of those. Let's get started. The first thing that I want to talk about are loop clamps. Some people call them Adel clamps. This one is a uncushioned loop clamp made of stainless steel. I found that I use a lot of these in the 3/4 inch variety, just as a way of attaching a lot of things to the 3/4 inch tubes on the Bearhawk. I use the uncushioned versions of these clamps in areas where it makes no sense really to have extra bulk, or doesn't really require a rubber connection. Here's a good example of where I use them together on fuel lines. So you can see that I've used a uncushioned version to clamp a cushioned version to one of the tubes. And the cushioned version here is also made of stainless steel and has a silicone cushion around it. And obviously you want to have cushions around your fuel lines. Fuel lines being made of aluminum, or aluminium as our British and Australian and New Zealand friends call them, because this is a lot softer than steel. So I found that I've used a whole lot of these uncushioned versions. I use them on things like adding fair leads to the tubes. This is an area where a fair lead was not added as a part of the quick build. But me being somewhat anal about having cables drag across tubes, I went ahead and added some. Here's one of the factory installed fair leads, and so on and so forth. So I added about 4 of these additional fair leads, just as a way of keeping the cable from dragging across the tubes. And another area where you tend to use a lot of the cushion variety or when you're routing wiring. In this particular case here, we're using a lot of 1/4 inch Adel clamps, or cushion clamps, the generic name, and we're using those to route wiring up to the front. So the tubes, little standoffs, are 1/4 inch tubing, and you use the required width of the Adel, and you can see as we get farther forward, the clamps that I used for the wiring gets bigger because we're bringing more wiring forward. One other area where I used the cushion clamps is in mounting the ELT antenna. As you can see, I used a piece of aluminum riveted to a piece of angle, and basically clamped it to a couple of the, I think those are 5/8 tubes, and it does a good job of suspending the antenna. Since the antenna is inside the fuselage, there won't be any wind, we hope, and so this is going to keep the antenna straight up and in a secure position. Down here we also used cushion clamps for securing the avionics shelf back here. I used cushion clamps with a number of washers. I used the uncushioned variety up front, and this is very sturdy. It won't move. So it's a good way. You don't want to drill holes in the steel tubing of the fuselage, so you have to use something that will connect it, and those are what the loop clamps do for you. Another little detail that you have to complete before you're going to cover the fuselage is getting your inspection ports made. This is the leading edge of the horizontal stabilizer area. I've made that out of aluminum, 025 aluminum. Cut them out with a fly cutter. I've still got to do some more securing. This is pretty floppy right now. Mounted it to the stringer with a piece of aluminum angle and riveted Down here, I added a pretty good size access port here, and the reason I did that was because I have all these servos up here that may need to be disconnected and replaced, or may need some service back here. And I made this inspection port really out of some excess stiffener that I had left over from my RV8 project, and it worked out beautifully. In fact, it was exactly the length that I needed for this, and it's very strong, very sturdy. So I still have to go back here and decide how I'm going to create the access port for this. It looks like that's going to be a pretty large area, probably something like 9 by 9 or along those lines, so that you can get in when you do the final assembly of the airplane, that you can install the elevator control horns, the trim control horns. There's a lot of work back there, and you've got to be able to get both hands in on both sides to connect it all. So that's probably going to be a pretty good size control port or inspection port there. But that's pretty much it as far as the inspection ports go. Everything else you can get to either by pulling up floorboard, or in this case back here, being able to get to these turnbuckles through the baggage compartment. As I said in an earlier video, I have tried very hard to minimize the number of radios and electronic components that are directly behind the inspection panel or the instrument panel. The reason I did that is because it's hard to get in there, and I learned from the RV8 that you have to get in there more than you think you're going to. You think you're going to install it and be done with it and everything's going to work fine. I don't know how many times I've had to pull out pieces of dyno equipment, send in for service. Sometimes it's my fault, sometimes it's their fault, most of the time their fault. And so I've tried very hard to make sure that I can get to everything I need without disassembling the instrument panel. So the only thing back there right now are the two comm boxes, which had to be back there because of the number of connections to the audio panel and other areas. The rest are scattered all over the place. There's one on the side, we've got some over here on the side, the batteries on the back. Hopefully I will achieve my objective and not end up having to root around behind that panel very much.